is now time for question period. The member from Nipissing.
My question is to the Minister of Finance. 2 years ago, your deficit was $9.2 billion. Last year, your deficit soared to $10.5 billion. Yesterday, you said you were pleased to report your deficit grew again to $10.9 billion. Minister, the only deficit target you should be pleased with is when you hit zero. You're heading the wrong way. You're getting farther away from balancing, not closer. You're now spending $29 million a day more than you're bringing in. In fact, in today's 5-minute delay, you spent $105,000 more dollars than you took in. Minister, you're failing families, you're hurting seniors, and you're putting them into an ever-deepening hole. Why should anyone believe you can balance the budget when you can't even reduce the deficit?
Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. I will act immediately on anyone that tries to get in heckles while I'm standing. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the member opposite has noted the challenges that have been before this province over the last 10 years. Recognizing how tough it was in 2008 and 2009, not just in Ontario, all across Canada. Similarly to the situation that happened with the federal government. And Ontario, Mr. Premier, has taken action by stimulating growth. And this year, Mr. Speaker, we beat our targets yet again by $1.6 billion. And we do so by moving the trajectory to balance by 2017-18, as we said we would. We're on target. We're achieving results. We're the lowest cost government because of some of the tremendous actions we've taken on Treasury Board to reduce our spending, to find the savings, to keep our fiscal house in order, while, Mr. Speaker, contrary to the opposition, we do want to stimulate the economy to ensure that we grow GDP, to make sure that everyone is employed, to make sure people and their families are better off. Thank you.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Minister, we realize it's April Fool's Day today, but you have to stop trying to fool the people of Ontario. Your own 2013 budget document listed the projected deficit at $10.1 billion. The fact you fluffed it up to a fake $12.5 billion forecast only to announce it came in at $10.9 billion didn't fool us, Minister. Let's go back to the secret internal cabinet documents we obtained during the gas plant scandal file. They talked about doing just what you did. Use a fake number for the deficit that was, quote, never a real expectation. It was a deliberate policy. Even that fake inflated number was $10.1 billion. You can't even meet your own fake number, Minister. When are you going to come clean and tell us the real state of Ontario's economy?
Seated, please. Seated, please. Thank you. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this is serious business. The member opposite is slamming the province. He's talking down Ontario, who have worked hard.
Carry on.
Mr. Speaker, Ontario has now, since the recession, has surpassed almost every jurisdiction around the world to create 500,000 net new jobs. Ontario has become the top destination in all of North America, beating out Texas, New York, California, and every other province for foreign direct investment. We're attracting investment, Mr. Speaker, and that's because they know that we have a very competitive and ensure that we have a very competitive business climate to keep our taxes low and to attract that investment. Mr. Speaker, we're creating jobs, we're stimulating growth, we're on a track to balance by 2017-18 as you said we would. Thank you.
Final supplementary.
To the Minister, now that we've heard the spin, Speaker, let's hear the facts. The Conference Board of Canada said you can't balance the books by 2017-18. In their report titled, How Bad Is It?, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce said, quote, Ontario's fiscal situation is becoming increasingly dire. we are likely to reach a state of crisis unless the province changes the way it does business. Moody's lowered their outlook from stable to negative. Fitch downgraded us to AA-. Everyone but you understands there's a serious problem in Ontario. Minister, when will you finally take the advice of experts and change course?
Thank you. Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Conference Board of Canada also states that Ontario and the government of Ontario has the most integrity of its numbers than any other government in Canada. The Conference Board of Canada also states that Ontario is expected to lead all of Canada with growth in GDP because of the stimulus package that we put in place. RBC, TD Bank, a number of economists recognize the tremendous work that Ontarians have done, that this province and this government has done to stimulate growth in order not only so that we can create greater revenue and greater wealth, but, Mr. Speaker, we are the lowest cost government in Canada because of the efforts we've taken. We have controlled our spending. We're keeping our fiscal house in order to take a balanced approach, not extreme measures that put people in harm's way or cut 100,000 people from their jobs as the opposition has recommended, Mr. Speaker.
To the Minister of Finance, your deficit, which grew from $9.2 billion to $10.5 billion, ballooning to $10.9 billion this year, is proof that you're not listening to the experts. You're not changing the way you do business. So, Minister, here's why all the focus on your deficit is so important. The Auditor General said, quote, Ontario's debt continues to grow faster than the province's economy, which could have negative implications for the province's finances. But her big concern was the quote, crowding.
I'm going to ask the member from Ottawa Orleans and Hamilton East Stony Creek to come to order. Wow. Oh, that shouldn't be interpreted as encouragement. Please finish.
Thank you, Speaker. The Auditor General's biggest concern was the, quote, crowding out of other spending. We now have less money for the things our citizens expect from the province. We're starting to see frontline cuts in health care and education, just as the Auditor warned.
Thank you.
Minister, are you too proud to admit you're wrong?
Thank you. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, how about that hospital? This side of the House will not fall prey to being reckless when it comes to cutting and slashing and burning the very services that Ontarians depend upon. Mr. Speaker, we are also not going to be reckless in our spending. Recognize that we must maintain our house in fiscal order and hold the line. And we are, because we've become the lowest cost government per capita funding and spending by any government in comparison. Mr. Speaker, we also note this. We have also become one of the lowest tax jurisdictions anywhere in the world, beating out every U.S. state when it comes to the combined corporate income tax. We have also maintained very effective stimulus packages to encourage that investment and create those jobs that are so critical to families in Ontario. And by so doing, we take that balanced approach. It's a measured approach that we said all along that we would do. And, Mr. Speaker, we are disciplined and determined to balance by 2017.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Minister, we're seeing death by 1,000 cuts right now, today, here in Ontario. Nurses are being cut at hospitals right across the province. We all have examples. Here are some from my hometown in North Bay. 94 full-time and 34 part-time frontline healthcare workers, including nurses, have been cut. More than 50 positions, including professors at Nipissing University, have been cut. 43 workers from Ontario Northland have been cut. Will you admit, Minister, that your wasteful, scandalous, and mismanaged spending is reducing services, hurting Ontario?
Please carry on.
Will you admit that your wasteful, scandalous and mismanaged spending is reducing services, hurting Ontario's children and putting the most vulnerable at risk.
Thank you. Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'll admit that the member opposite is confused. Because he is, what's the term, sucking and blowing, Mr. Speaker. On the one hand, he's suggesting that we make cuts. He's suggesting go across the board and find greater savings and put people in harm's way, just as he ran in a platform to cut 100,000 jobs from Ontarians. Now he's saying, wait a minute, you're cutting too much. Mr. Speaker, we're not doing that at all. We're taking a balanced approach. We're transforming the way government does business. The President of the Treasury Board is going line by line to ensure that everything we do is creating greater value for Ontarians, ensuring that we hold the line on our spending. And, Mr. Speaker, what they are not doing is stimulating the economy. They're not supporting transit and investment in infrastructure that enables us to do better.
Answer.
And that is exactly what this budget is going to be all about. And, Mr. Speaker, it is enabling us to succeed and to surpass other provinces.
Thank you. Final supplementary.
Minister, on your watch, seniors and our most vulnerable have seen their hydro rates triple to the point they need to decide whether it's food or warmth. But that wasn't enough for you. Your thirst to find even more money to feed your spending addiction seems to have no bounds. You cut cataract surgeries. You cut diabetes testing strips. You cut physiotherapy for seniors. This is exactly the crowding out the Auditor General told you what happened if you didn't drastically change course. A $10.9 billion deficit built on self-interest is not a cause for celebration. It's a legacy of disgrace, and you should be ashamed of it.
Thank you. Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ontario was hit very hard during that recession. In fact, we were hit the first and the hardest, and we stayed the course and we held our ground, and Ontarians stood tall, stood strong to continue to reinvest in enabling us to not feel the shock of the recession as deeply and as long as other places around the world. He referenced some recommendations by Don Drummond. Not only have we surpassed all the work that was being recommended, we have now even made even greater strides to ensure that we sustain even more savings going forward. And, Mr. Speaker, what the opposition are not talking about is investing in our people, investing in education and our skills and training, investing in infrastructure and transit that enables us to provide for more jobs, and, Mr. Speaker, maintaining a very competitive and dynamic business climate so that we can create more jobs in our province. And, Mr. Speaker, that's what we are doing. Thank you.
Any question? Leader of the